With Liquor Barn, you can shop your favorite bourbon, that perfect bottle of wine, or discover something new. To place an order for pickup or delivery, download the Liquor Barn app, visit liquorbarn.com, or call your nearest Liquor Barn location. Follow us on social media and subscribe to our email list for all the latest news on products, promotions, and events. Liquor Barn, where Kentuckians go to celebrate life. Cheers!
Welcome to the Bourbon Life Podcast, your source for all things bourbon. Join your hosts, Mark and Matt, as they drink and review bourbons, share news about upcoming events, interview the who's who in the bourbon world, and, most importantly, bring you along for the fun of living the bourbon life. Now, here's your hosts, Mark and Matt.
All right, everybody, welcome back for another episode of the Bourbon Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark, and with me tonight, live here in the Bourbon Life Studios, otherwise known as my basement, it's my good friend, Matt. Matt, how you doing out there, man?
Mark, I am doing great out here. It is nice to be back in the basement. Don't have the fireplace on, no need for it since it's nice and warm springtime here in Kentucky, but man, am I glad to be back.
Yeah, me too, man. It's great to be here. Glad you're here with me, of course, man. We've been doing this. Matt, this is awesome. I've never in a million years would have imagined when we started this back in 2020 that here we are 3-4 years later still doing it, man. So this is awesome. We don't have a presenting sponsor tonight. I was going to say we're the Bourbon Life Podcast presented by, well, nobody tonight. But hey, we appreciate all of our sponsors. Mm-hmm. We thank them for everything they do for us. We couldn't do the show without their help. And with that said, Matt, let's just jump into the show, man. You want to tell everybody who we have with us tonight?
I'd love to. As we've been looking through our schedule, I've been patiently waiting for this show because it showed up on the schedule probably back in January of 2023, maybe even December 2022. And it's just, I've been patiently waiting for this episode. And here we are. He was the star of episode 57, if you can remember back then, March 12th of 2021. I don't remember back then, but anyway, we brought him back again. He is the master distiller at Four Roses, Brent Elliott. Brent, welcome back to the Bourbon Life Podcast.
Well, thanks. It's good to be back.
Brent, thank you so much for joining us again. We're thrilled to have you back. Matt and I are big fans of what you guys do, obviously. And like Matt said, been looking forward to doing this show for quite a while. So I'm glad we're able to get this worked out and get it together. So thank you for joining us again. And with that said, I'll tell you what, let's talk about what we're going to be drinking on this first round, Brent, if you don't mind to talk a little bit about because we're going to kind of do a special flight tonight, really, these 3 pours that we're going to be focused on. So if you just want to tell everybody what we have poured up, that'd be great.
Yeah, this is exciting. We're looking at 3 different private barrels that you guys have. And, for those that aren't familiar with the private barrels, what these represent are the different recipes that we produce at Four Roses. So we're going to taste 3 distinctly different recipes. And these guys sent over the actual barrels that they had. So I dug through our retention samples here and I found 2 barrels from the exact same batches. They're going to be different barrels, so it's going to be interesting. Awesome. And then the third was from same recipe, a totally different batch. I didn't have the third, but I think that'll add sort of an extra dimension here because we're tasting the same recipe, but not only is it different barrels, but it's going to be from a different batch. So I'm really looking forward to this. It's kind of a new take on these online tastings. I like it.
Yeah. This is fun. And when I spoke with Lauren and she was like, "Hey, here, what do you have?" And I told her, and she's like, "What warehouses are they from?" And told her, and I was like, "This is going to be really cool. I mean, this is going to be a great opportunity to really go through and see how unique your single barrels are, and these products, these guys that they get to come in and pick these barrels as well, what they're picking. But this is going to be a great time to get to delve deeper into that. And Matt, this one we have poured up first. Which one? Who was this picked by? Do you remember? You got the bottle, right?
This was picked by ours truly here, Brent Elliott. This is an OBSF, and the label here is telling us we have a 10-year, 6-month OBSF coming in at 54.7% out of Warehouse RS. barrel 71-1M.
Very, very nice. So, Brent, do you want to tell everybody really quick what those letters, the people out there that don't know? I mean, obviously there's there's a cult of people out there that know exactly what that means, but there are some listeners that probably aren't quite up to snuff on that. Do you mind just to kind of share with everybody what that is?
Absolutely not. So it's a 4-letter code. What you want to focus on is the second letter, which represents the mash bill. If it's a B, that indicates the high rye mash bill, which is 35% rye. The E, which will be the second sample we taste, that is the low rye mash bill, which is 20% rye. So both are relatively high in rye. The 35% is especially high in rye. But then the last letter of the code, that indicates the yeast strain. The yeast strain on this one is the F. That particular strain, through the fermentation process, creates a lot of herbal, sometimes minty or clove-like flavors. Okay. So it's a very interesting recipe. I really enjoy this one.
It's funny because thinking about it, because Matt's a rye guy, just rye whiskey, but he loves high rye bourbon. So we're doing 2 of the B recipes. So I know he's thrilled about that. But just thinking in terms of that, you got a high rye bourbon and you've got a yeast strain though that lends to that. What I think would maybe be perceived possibly as rye type of notes, mintiness, things like that. So Matt, let's talk about the nose. What do you pick up with this high rye bourbon with that specific yeast strain?
This one's really, it's taken on a couple different characteristics as it's sat in the glass a little longer. At first, I picked up a lot of really creamy, kind of nougat, almost like taffy type notes, kind of sweet, creamy sugar notes. And as it's sitting out, I think more of that high rye and more of that yeast strain are starting to open up because I'm getting a little more orange zest, a little clove, almost like orange creamsicle, like a sweet sherbet or orange creamsicle ice cream on it with some of the like clove and mint spice in it as well. Just absolutely lovely. Just really, really nice nose.
Yeah. It's funny, Matt. I almost get like, you're talking about the orange flavor. It's almost like candied orange to me that comes across with that. Not cherry, but just kind of a candy, very sweet candied orange aroma that comes through. I'm not, I was thinking I'm going to go in here and pick up a ton of mint, like a rye whiskey or something, but I don't really pick that up as much. Matt, are you getting any of those types of notes at all on that?
Maybe it could just be because I'm thinking it's the high rye F recipe that I'm trying to find it in there. I got you. But it might open up a little bit, and I'm certainly not going to say it. I don't pick up a mintiness, but it's not as prominent.
Yeah. So Brent, you picked this, so
yeah, right.
So did we do okay? Did we do you justice on that, or?
Absolutely. You actually swayed my opinion of it because, well, I agree. I don't see the mint you typically expect. I expect maybe on the palate we'll see some more of that, but I was getting definitely like creamy vanilla, almost like a creme brulee type, like dessert, like sweet, creamy character on the nose. I was leaning more towards maybe a hint of light berries. When you said orange sherbet, that's where it, it's very suggestive. You said that and like, yeah, that's there. That's really kind of tying all those rounded kind of sweet flavors together.
Yeah. Very, very good, Matt. See, I told you, Matt's the super palate. He's the talent on the show.
No way.
So Brent, we've had you on. It's been over 2 years. So I think it'd be great if we could kind of go back. And if you would just take some time and kind of share your story with our listeners and tell everybody a little bit about, where you're from, your background. And because I love the story, it's great, especially how you got where you are. But if you wouldn't care, just take as long as you like and just kind of share that story with our listeners.
Okay. Well, I grew up here in the great state of Kentucky, but I'm from the other side. I'm from Western Kentucky, from Owensboro. There's a lot of bourbon history and heritage in that part of Kentucky also. But I went to the University of Kentucky. I majored in chemistry because I've always enjoyed science. Ironically, I've always also loved bourbon. I never really imagined that the two would come together. I don't know. It just honestly hadn't occurred to me. Like I sometimes say, I always wanted to do this, but I just didn't know it. I guess I just wasn't conscious of it.
Right.
Because when I I was living in Tennessee. This is 2005. I'd just gotten married, just bought a house, and I came up and I took a tour of Woodford Reserve. And that was that moment where the obvious that should have occurred to me before came together. I was like, this is, the bourbon making process. At some level, this is chemistry. They have to need chemists for this. And so it was truly the very next day I got back to Nashville, and I got looking online, and I found a position open for, it didn't say what distillery, it just said a distillery in Kentucky. It needed a lot of experience with chemistry, in particular analytical chemistry. And I had the exact experience that the job was looking for. So a few phone interviews later, and just a few days later, it happened all pretty quickly, I was up here interviewing at Four Roses. And, this is 2005. So I really didn't even know what the brand was at the time.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'd driven by the warehouses one time, and I remember seeing the warehouses, and I was frankly confused because I thought I knew the bourbon world pretty well. I'd lived in Kentucky the majority of my life. And then here are these warehouses, just spreading out, at the time it was 20 warehouses and a big Four Roses sign. Yet I was totally unaware of what Four Roses was. So I just kind of, forgot about that or filed it away. And then I got to, the phone interview stage of this process of, this job search. And they told me it was Four Roses. And at first they told me it was Lawrenceburg, Kentucky. So I knew clearly it had to be wild turkey, right?
Yeah. Right.
And so I wanted to, impress the recruiter. So the second time I talked to her on the phone, I was like, we can cut the act. I know we're talking about wild turkey here. And she's like, no, it's actually Four Roses. and I thought back to those warehouses out in Cox's Creek, Kentucky, with the big Four Roses sign. I was like, I don't know anything about Four Roses. I've never, apart from seeing the warehouse, I'd never tasted, heard of it, seen it on the shelf. And so I was intrigued. Shortly after that, we set up the in-person interview. I asked where I could actually find a bottle so I could do a little homework for, any bottle of Four Roses prior to the interview. And they found a place between Bowling Green and Lawrenceburg in Bowling Green. Yeah, it was Chuck's Liquors. I think they carry our single barrel, which had just been launched the year before. So I bought a bottle of that the day before I was on my way up for the interview. Tried it the night before, fell in love with it. So I went in I was a little more invigorated. I was like, okay, this Four Roses thing, this could really pan out. I really like the bourbon. It's a great bottle. And then once I actually visited, once I was on site, I fell in love with the facility, the people, everyone's passion and confidence in the brand. Because at that time, we didn't know that we were just a few years away from a big bourbon boom and that the brand would just explode into all 50 states. But, everyone's kind of modest and being realistic. They're like, we know we have a great brand. We have a great product. We've been out of the country for a long time. We have a lot of barrels. The quality is fantastic. Our plan is to expand eventually outside the state of Kentucky. No promises where this brand's going to go, but that's what we believe in, and we believe in ourselves, and we believe in the bourbon. So I was pretty much sold. So that's where I started. I started out actually in the lab running a particular piece of instrumentation, a GC mass spec.
Okay.
But we were so small at the time. We just had a handful of people in management. So there was a ton of opportunity for me to learn from the few people around me, to pitch in, to offer to do, to help with any part of the company's growth. And so that was kind of where my journey began. I was doing, my actual department was quality control, but I was doing quality control, from the grains that came in the door to the labels that went on the bottles or the corks and everything in between. And shortly after, just doing the analytical side, I started getting involved with something that I still am very involved with, and probably the favorite part of my job. And that's actually dealing with individual batches and barrels, seeing the product of what, all the hard work and precision out in the distillery, how that all translates into the finished product in these different barrels, and the variety, between ages and recipes, and bringing these all together to create our core products, for selecting barrels for the private barrel program, blending up limited editions. But I kind of eased into that. They didn't have me doing that like week 2. I started out very slowly, learning, just how to nose, how to taste, how to evaluate barrels, how to articulate what I was tasting.
Right.
That was, a big challenge. And especially because, if you're talking to, like the way we're talking now, we have a certain language that we use because we understand the bourbon community kind of speaks, in a certain way when describing bourbons. But you'll find, and I've found that every distillery or, community within each company, we all have our own language of how we're describing things, almost like shorthand,
Right.
what we're seeing in distillate or maturate. And it's just all about effective communication because we're all smelling and tasting what we're smelling and tasting. We don't really know exactly if the person next to us is smelling or tasting that exactly. But if we're at parity with how we're describing the same note that we're certainly both getting, I think that the culture or the language kind of evolves from that.
Right. Yeah.
So, I just sort of worked with the liquid, continued working with quality control, and then just kind of grew with the company. So, that was 2005 when I started. Fast forward to 2015, now we're in all 50 states. We're expanding the distillery. We're expanding the bottling line, actually building a new bottling facility. It's just grown exponentially since when I started. And then in 2015, Jim Rutledge, who, if anyone who knows anything about bourbon knows the name Jim Rutledge, he was our master distiller for 49 years when he retired in 2015. So at that point, I was called into the president's office and she sat me down. She said, Jim's retiring, which was an absolute bombshell. And he'd always talked about, maybe retiring, but, he loved the brand and the industry so much that everyone just dismissed him. It was
right.
Like, whatever, Jim, sure you are. So it was sort of unbelievable. First that was probably the bigger news of the 2 pieces of news I got that day. She said, he's retiring and you're going to be the next master distiller.
Wow.
And so I was like, it wasn't a question. And so I didn't answer. I just smiled and said, well, we'll see where this takes us.
I mean, that's awesome. So I'm curious, going back to the very beginning though, because you were working with your chemistry background, and you had familiarity with what they wanted you to do at Four Roses. When you got there, was that transferable? What you had been doing, did it translate into the bourbon industry when you first got to Four Roses?
Some of it, in particular, the work with the GC mass spec.
Yeah. Okay.
That translated very well because they just bought that instrument. And it's a pretty expensive piece of high-tech instrumentation. They'd bought it, but no one knew how to really run it. So that came kind of natural. Everything else was totally new to me. In particular, quality control. I was in that department about a year and a half ago. I finally transitioned out of the department. I was the director of the quality control department, and it just got to be too much. So instead of managing a whole team of people, now I'm focusing on basically the overall quality of the liquid in the bottle, whatever it takes to get there. So I'm involved still in all pieces of the process. But as I was growing, the part that didn't come natural to me was, the pure quality control aspect of the job. I had no training in quality systems or anything that you need as a growing and robust organization to maintain quality. So that was a steep learning curve for me. And yeah, that's tough. I always sort of said, it's a thankless job. It's tough because there are a million problems hiding in plain sight to come out and wreak havoc. Whether it's just, minor issues with dry goods or, quality of something on the bottling line. There are so many things that you have to be prepared for and all these systems you have to build to mitigate or eliminate all those risks, that it is one of those jobs that will keep you up at night, and it's beyond a full-time job.
Yeah.
And so that was a steep learning curve. I enjoyed it. And I, in particular, enjoyed, the fact that when you're talking bourbon, quality control means how does it taste? And so that kind of came naturally to me. I've always enjoyed bourbon. But I can't say, when I started, I didn't have, it's interesting because I was tasting exactly what I'm tasting now, but I didn't know how to really put it into the context of production or other barrels or other brands. All that is just experience. So we're all born with it. It's just a matter of sort of, cataloging all of that and building a map inside your mind to make it useful, to apply that to, the kinds of things that I do every day here now.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at that and great way to say that. I agree. That's pretty awesome. Matt, let's jump back to the whiskey. Let's talk about it in terms of the palate and the finish on this one. So what do you pick up on this?
It is big and bold and spicy right on the front of the palate.
Yeah, it is.
A lot of that, the peppercorn comes through. Some of that mint kind of hits nice and hard on the front of the palate. Then it's creamy. It's got a really creamy mouthfeel, really oily. Lends itself to some of those rye notes, the baking spices. There's a little bit of cinnamon, almost like a little bit of ginger, like some sort of a crisp type like flavor that's really crisp and kind of punchy on the palate. Then a nice long warm finish. The mint comes through on there. There's honey, a little bit of caramel on the finish too. So just really well-rounded. Nice punch right up front, and the heat stays, but it's not overpowering in the least.
Yeah, I agree. And this one was, what was this, Matt? Like
104.9, I think. 109.4, sorry.
109.4.
Yes.
Yeah. So not super high, but still high enough, that it's got a little warmth to it. Not overpowering, like you said, but the spice comes through, which is great. To me, it was cinnamon. You said pepper, and then you said cinnamon as well, but to me, it was just more cinnamon. And then on the finish, I actually started getting like a nice dark cherry type of flavor on that finish. I don't know, Matt, obviously you're shaking your head like you did not get that, but that's just something that came through to me. But the mintiness, like you said, I started picking up those when you think of a high rye and the yeast that we talked about that has those notes that lend towards what you would anticipate maybe with the rye. Those notes did start coming through as well on that finish, which was super nice and very long. Really enjoyed that one. So Brent, did we do okay on that one?
Oh, absolutely. And what's interesting is the comment you made earlier before we even nosed it about how the F characteristics are kind of in line with the same kind of flavors you get from rye. I think of the OBSF the same way. Like those F notes, you're talking herbal and you're talking kind of in the family of like those green flavors. And that's kind of how rye comes across to me. And I'm sure you've dealt with this. It's hard to describe. You can't describe rye unless someone knows what you're talking about. It doesn't really taste like anything else when it comes through in a bourbon. But those same notes really are so similar. So an OBSF, sometimes when they hit just right, it's just like extra rye. It's just that rye so pronounced, and there's synergy with those other F-type flavors. But I wasn't really getting that on the nose. I was kind of surprised. Like you guys said, and I agree, there wasn't a whole lot of mint on the nose. But once that hits the palate, to me, it's immediate rye. And all those spices that come with it all mingled with those F characteristics. And they're really playing very well with the oak in this. I'm getting a lot of pronounced oak, but it's just integrated so well. That spice and that oak, it's hard to tell where one ends and the other begins. It's just a nice balance of all those flavors. And then I agree, the finish to me is cinnamon, and that oak and some of those, minty tones kind of fade, and that cinnamon kind of comes to the forefront and just lingers.
Yep. That's exactly, that cinnamon just was there. And like I said, I like a little hint of cherry that was in there too for me for some reason. But yeah, that cinnamon was really, really nice. And just, like I said, lingered for quite some time. So, we are actually at the end of round one. That was fast.
That was fast.
that was almost too fast. But I'm like, man, all right, we should probably take a break, and get a word from our sponsors. And we'll be back with more with Brent Elliott, the master distiller at Four Roses, in just a minute. From our good friends at the Stave comes Lexington's newest hot spot to meet up with friends, have fun, and eat some great food. District 7 Social is a social and beer hall, but it's a lot more than that. Located in Lexington's Distillery District, it's the home of Lexington's first duck pin bowling lanes, and it also features a self-serve beer wall. That's right, self-serve. And if you want more, they've got it. You can try one of their delicious cocktails from the bar or order some great German fusion food from their on-site eatery, Germanish. So what are you waiting for? Be seen, be social. District 7 Social.
The Stave Restaurant is a bourbon lover's paradise right here in the heart of bourbon country. Located at 5711 McCracken Pike in Millville, Kentucky, between Castle and Key and Woodford Reserve, Chef Kyle Klatka prepares amazing food each day that features an elevated Kentucky-inspired cuisine. With a full-service bar, great bourbon flights, and signature cocktails, the Stave is the perfect place to catch up with friends after a fun-filled day of touring the local distilleries. Be sure to check them out online at thestavekentucky.com or at Instagram and Facebook at The Stave Kentucky.
All right, everybody, welcome back for the second round of the Bourbon Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark, and with me tonight here live in the Bourbon Life Studios, it's my good friend, my co-host, Matt. Matt, how you doing, man?
Mark, I am doing so great over here, my little area of the Bourbon Life Studios. How are you doing in the control center?
You know what, man? Houston, we have no problems tonight, knock on wood.
Yep.
So, yeah, this is great. And we're drinking some high rye bourbon. And Matt, you know, it's funny because we've known each other now for 4 years or more, and you were always just this high rye guy and the rye whiskey. And I was like, no, that's not my thing. And the longer we've hung out and done these shows, man, I'm just like slowly inching my way towards being this high rye bourbon and rye whiskey fan. So you've had a positive, I don't know if I call it a positive influence, Matt,
Yeah.
but you definitely had an influence on me. So this is kind of right in my wheelhouse now too, Matt. So this is a great show, and I'm really excited that we're getting to do this one. But do you want to tell everybody who we have with us tonight?
Absolutely. So unfortunately, you're stuck with Mark and I, but we did bring in a great guest to make things interesting, and he is the master distiller at Four Roses, Brent Elliott. Brent, welcome back for round 2 of the Bourbon Life Podcast.
It's good to be back for round 2.
Yeah, this is great. So if you'd like to, do you want to tell everybody what we've got poured up for this second round here?
Yes, for this round, we have the OESK.
Yeah.
So for those of you that maybe can't decipher that code just from the hip, this is the low rye mash bill, and it is the K yeast strain, which creates the nice spicy flavors, like the baking spices.
Okay, very nice. And this particular barrel that we're drinking off of, or bottle, single barrel, this was a pick from BHG, which is Bluegrass Hospitality Group, which is Malone's. People that live here in Lexington will recognize that name, Malone's and Harry's and those restaurants. So this was a pick they did. I think this was actually a couple years ago. This one's actually 11 years old, 54.9. So what is that? 109.8 proof total. So Matt, what are you picking up on this one on the nose?
Well, when we talk about the E, what percentage of rye is that? So that's the lower rye, and
It's 20% rye.
see, that's beautiful. Even the low rye is 20%.
Yeah, because you know what? In the world of bourbon, the things I've been reading a lot about it lately, just to learn more, and you know, anything over like 18% people consider to be high rye. So it's funny to say this is our low rye mash bill, but it's a high rye bourbon overall for industry standards on that for sure. Good point, Matt. I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, absolutely. And this has got a great nose to it. I really love the E influence on this one. It comes across a little sweeter, a little softer, but the baking spices are definitely prominent. For me, this one I get like some more like Middle Eastern baking spices, cardamom, coriander, kind of like those type flavors. There's almost like a little bit of honey or like a subtle nuttiness to it, like almost like a pistachio or something, but great barrel influence as well. I pick up a good amount of the oak here, is really, really providing some playfulness and balancing out the spice in it, and the sweetness from that, the lower rye, the higher corn content in there is really nice too. Some of that good cornbread, honey sweetness is really nice.
Yeah, that oak definitely comes through, Matt. I'm actually picking up almost like a brown sugary or burnt sugar type of aroma on this as well. And then almost something floral, which is really weird. I don't know if my palate may be off a little today, but there's something just light to me that keeps coming, and I can't really put my finger on what it is. I'm going to let that open up for just a little bit more before I say anything else. But anyway, Brent, I should just ask, how did Matt do? Because I really didn't contribute a whole lot on.
I really loved, the comment about the unique kind of Middle Eastern type spices, because that's what I can't put my finger on there, because it's spicy, but I can't just say it's this spice. It's somewhere between like a nutmeg, or even I'm getting a lot of tea leaves off this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But it's that family of very unique, very interesting spice. And it's interesting too, because the rye, I guess, coming off the high rye sample we had last time, and even though this is 20%, I'm not really picking up the rye. I know it's in there and it's probably adding synergy to some of those spicy flavors, but here it's all the baking spice. I'm not really picking up that rye spice. And I'm even picking up, even though this is a K, it's probably, since it's the low rye mash bill too, it's some of the sweetness is coming through and probably giving it more of a fruity impression, because I'm picking up some light fruit on this, almost like maybe cherry, or again, sort of one of those fruits, nondescript fruits that I can't put my finger on, but it's got that light undertone of sweet fruitiness and super interesting spice.
Mm-hmm. So maybe that's where, to me, it's translating like almost a light floral, but light fruit to what you're saying. So maybe I'm using the wrong verbiage, but it just has this really light sweetness to it that I can't put my finger on what that is. But I think, talking in terms of light fruit would make sense to me, but I can't say exactly what that would be. But there's just a lightness which I didn't anticipate, just kind of a surprise, thinking in terms of spice, 20% rye with that K, just wouldn't anticipate that type of a note coming out, right? Very nice. So Brent, let's talk about the history, because Four Roses has a very interesting, unique history. And even recently, over the last 20-ish years, some really interesting things as well. So can you kind of give us a broad history lesson about the brand itself, but then talk a little bit more, because you kind of referenced it when you were talking about looking for the job and not exactly knowing about Four Roses. So kind of go a little more in depth on that so people understand what you're referring to there.
Absolutely. So this year is actually the 135th anniversary of the trademark of the brand. So clearly we're a very old brand. Mm-hmm. So 17 years ago, I should have known what Four Roses was, but there's a good reason for me not really being familiar with the brand at that time. And so it goes back, we were founded, our founder began his whiskey career down in Atlanta, Georgia. And we're not sure exactly when he started selling Four Roses, or when he created the brand. But we know for sure that he moved up to Kentucky, up to Louisville, and started selling whiskey from Whiskey Row. And then in 1888, he trademarked the Four Roses brand. So that's really the official starting point. The brand existed for sure in 1888, and he continued selling Four Roses up to his death. He died in 1895, but then his nephew, Lawrence Laval Jones, took over the company, and he continued selling bourbon up to Prohibition. And then when Prohibition hit, he was one of the, he was very savvy. He was a savvy businessman. He bought the Frankfurt Distilling Company. The Frankfurt Distilling Company had a license to sell bourbon as medicine. Yeah. So, which was, obviously great for him. But for the brand, it was, we wouldn't be sitting here today talking Four Roses, because it would have been just another one of the hundreds of brands that were just lost to history when Prohibition hit. But because we were there through Prohibition, as a medicine, we were still in the public's consciousness that entire time. So after Prohibition, sales increased. We became one of the top selling bourbons in the country. And then in 1943, Seagram's, the huge Canadian spirits company, they bought the brand. And this was just after the founder's nephew, Lawrence Laval Jones, after he passed away. So the company the family sold the company. Seagram's began just investing in growing the company even further. So here we are. We're one of the top selling bourbons in the U.S., widely regarded, respected. And then Seagram's decided to take the Four Roses bourbon and focus that entirely in international markets. So all the straight bourbon whiskey started going to Japan and Europe, but they didn't want to lose all the equity and the recognition that Four Roses had in the U.S. So what they did was they made Four Roses in the U.S. a blended whiskey.
Yeah.
So very similar to, the Canadian style that I guess, they're Canadians and they were into the blending and they were probably proud of their Canadian blended whiskey. So at the time, though, the U.S. consumer was kind of leaning more towards lighter spirits, and blended whiskey certainly is much lighter than a rich straight bourbon whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons for that is you only need about 20% of straight whiskey to go into a blended whiskey. The rest can be young whiskey or grain neutral spirits, light whiskey. You can add other components to come to the full 100% blend. So because of that, it's lighter, and you use less straight bourbon to actually create a given case of blended whiskey, which is really a big deal when you're talking about a product that you have to age X number of years before you can even sell it. So by doing that, they could spread their inventory much further. They could focus the bourbon in the international markets. So it's strictly, it was a business decision. And it's probably good for the company. It was probably profitable. But what it wasn't good for was the reputation of Four Roses in the U.S. So from the 50s all the way up until, sort of the modern era, the resurrection of Four Roses in the U.S., the quality declined, the recognition declined, until, fast forward to 2002, it's a bottom shelf blended whiskey that no one's talking about. It's nothing to write home about. It's just another mid-tier, low-tier blended whiskey brand. However, you can still go to Japan or Europe and still get excellent Four Roses straight bourbon whiskey. Mm-hmm. Fortunately for us, when Seagram started selling off all their assets, Kirin, the Japanese beer company, had been distributing Four Roses in Japan for many years, and they didn't like the idea of possibly losing the rights to that distribution. So they came in and they bought the distillery and they bought the brand. And immediately they brought it back to the U.S. market. And that was at the urging of my predecessor, Jim Rutledge, who'd been trying to get it back in the market, in the U.S. market for years. So basically, just as an act of good faith, they said, sure, we'll pull the blended whiskey off the market. We'll re-release Four Roses straight bourbon whiskey in Kentucky only. And everyone was happy. And, then fast forward to 2005, that's when I came along. And by then, we had some plans to expand a little bit further. But again, nobody knew that, where the whiskey category was, that we were poised for, such a renaissance just a few years down the road. So the timing was absolutely perfect. But that explains why, and I've racked my brains. I know in college and, after college, I wasn't necessarily picking my spirits off the top shelf. So I was still kind of focused on more of the mid to low tier bottles, and still I don't recall ever seeing Four Roses. So it must have been ankle level or something. I never saw Four Roses. My first exposure was again when I drove by the warehouses back in it was like 2003. So here we are. We're back in 2006. Even we're still in the state of Kentucky, but we're really small batch. Mm-hmm. Then we started adding new markets, and then within a few years, we were in all 50 states. And before we knew it, we were growing faster than we could handle. So, starting in about 2012, 2013, we started putting together a plan to expand the distillery, to build a new bottling facility. Now we're adding new warehouses. But what we did is we essentially doubled the capacity of the distillery. We completed that project in 2019. We finished a new bottling facility in 2017. And when I started, we had 20 warehouses. We're now up to 25, and we're continuously building a couple more each year, because we have to have a place to put all that extra bourbon or white dog that's coming off the stills.
Yeah, that's right. So I was going to say, I don't know when you're at UK, but if you went to the football games like I did when I was at UK, you had to have bourbon to drink just to get through the football games.
Yeah.
But going back and talking about the expansions and things that have gone on, you guys expanded there at the Cocsis Creek, and then you've got the bottling facility, right? That's a separate location, is that right?
That's on the same grounds as the warehouse.
Oh, same ground.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And then you also have the facility down in Claremont, right? Or outside of Claremont. Is that right?
That is the Cocsis Creek facility.
That's
so. I mean, you could say Bardstown, you could say Claremont.
Yeah. Okay.
But if you really focus
in
closely, there's that little pocket that's called Cocsis Creek.
Cocsis Creek.
And I don't know what else is in Cocsis Creek. I mean, some homes and some warehouses.
There's not much there, right? When you drive by. So you mentioned your warehouses, and that's one thing I wanted to bring up, because you guys are really unique about that with your warehousing. Can you talk about the warehouses that Four Roses uses and why you guys choose to go that way?
Absolutely. And that goes back to Seagram's back in the late 50s, early 60s. I think they were tired of rotating barrels.
Okay.
Because with aging a barrel, the temperature really that's the largest factor on how any barrel ages. Mm-hmm. And if you have a super tall warehouse, you're going to have a big temperature variation from the bottom to the top. So it's going to create different characteristics as you go vertically through the barrels. So some people still do it today, but back then it was really common practice to rotate barrels. So that each barrel kind of experienced the same environment throughout its aging life. But Seagram's came up with this idea, which was really pretty brilliant. Just let's make the warehouses shorter. So the warehouses that we have are only 6 barrels high. They're still about the average capacity of a typical warehouse. We keep them at about 20,000 barrels, but totally full, they'd be a little over 24,000 barrels. So they're just longer and they're wider. But they are unique to the industry. And for us, it's really, it's best for us because we have the 10 recipes, and that's how we want to control the variety and the flavors in our products. If we had multi-tiered warehouses, for some producers, that is an advantage because that creates a big difference from the bottom to the top. Right. And you can utilize that difference to your advantage to create maybe different products with different profiles. For us, we want to create the differences with the recipes and not have to worry about one more dimension of variability. That would be, a nightmare to me as a blender.
To have 10 recipes and then have 8 floors of barrels that you're having to choose from. Yeah, I can't imagine what tracking that and trying to do talking about quality analysis on that, right?
No, that'd be a little too much.
Yeah, no doubt. So Matt, let's speaking of the liquid, let's jump back over and talk a little bit more about this OESK, the BHG pick that we've got here. What do you think in terms of the palate and the finish on this one?
The palate, again, nice and spicy right up front. There's not as bold, I think, as the one we just had before, the OBSF, but nice peppercorn and more of those baking spices. I get like nutmeg and clove kind of coming through right on the front of the palate. Then there's a sweetness and a nuttiness. I think, again, kind of like back to that honey pistachio that I pick up. Then a good amount of the oak comes through. I think you said, Mark, this was 11 years old. Is that right?
Yeah, 11 years
old.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think a lot of good barrel influence really comes through and brings some boldness in with that oak to kind of soften out some of the spices. Almost leads to like a little bit of tobacco picking up in it as well, kind of tobacco-y leather notes. And a nice like sweet, like spicy corn sweetness finish on it as well. Just really well done. Really, really great recipe.
Yeah, I enjoy this one too, Matt. Like you said, that spice hits right up front, but you get that oak, that the leather, the tobacco, kind of those what I would equate with older bourbons, and at 11 years old. I mean, that would make sense. You could pick up some of those notes on that. But yeah, just we talked about the first one. Again, this one just has that nice balance. Everything just seems to play really well together. Nothing, dominates or overwhelms anything else. You get these, it's kind of like a roller coaster. You get these little waves, you get some spice, you get some sweetness, you get a little oak, but everything just really intertwines really well on that. So nothing overpowers anything. So it's really, really a nice drink. And at 109.8, again, this one's just really nice. Drinking it neat, just really nice to drink. So, all right, Brent, how do we do on that one?
No, I agree. For one, I agree too that this one is a little bit softer than the previous sample,
Yep.
even though it is a few degrees proof higher. And I'm kind of getting a real visual on this one as I taste it. And I'm picturing the oak is kind of the anchor of the flavors here. It seems like the oak is right there. It's really prominent on the palate, but it's sort of surrounded by a lot of more delicate, creamy, soft, rounded flavors. And there's a lot of that spice. It's still hanging out. It's like a top note just all around that core flavor. And it's, again, some of those spices that we were talking about earlier. Very vibrant, kind of. I think they're more vibrant on the nose, but they're there on the palate just to kind of balance everything out and make it a very interesting and complex bourbon.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned the creaminess. It's funny because one of the first sips I had, it almost was reminiscent of like almost a creme brulee, kind of a burnt sugar, but a very creamy feel as well, with spice. So it's like a spiced creme brulee. So that was really, really unique. Well, I'll tell you what, we're at the end of round 2 here already, which is crazy. It's going by too fast, Brent.
I know.
No doubt. Well, I'll tell you what, let's take a quick break. We'll get a word from our sponsors, and then we'll be back with more with Brent Elliott, the master distiller at Four Roses, in just a minute.
Three Chord's line of whiskeys embody the spirit of creativity. The whiskey is a true collaboration between producer and composer Neil Giraldo and master blender distiller Ari Sussman. The 3 Chord team of expert blenders, coopers, and sensory professionals have developed a multi-step process they called Perfectly Tuned Taste. This process begins by carefully selecting the finest bourbon and rye whiskeys from Kentucky, Tennessee, and Indiana, and then blending them together. Find out more about the whiskeys and distribution in your area at www.3chordbourbon.com.
All right, everybody, welcome back for the third and sadly final round of the Bourbon Life Podcast. I'm your host, Mark, and with me tonight, live here in the Bourbon Life Studios, it's my good high rye bourbon drinking buddy, Matt. Matt, how you doing out there, bud?
Oh, Mark, I was doing great until you reminded me that we're now in the third and final segment of the podcast here. But I am doing absolutely super. How about yourself?
Oh, I'm too, man. I'm looking for a grand finale here. Like the fireworks show, right? This is going to be the one that really sets it off. So I'm excited to get to this one. So you want to tell everybody who have with us tonight, though, Matt?
Absolutely. Back for round 3 is the master distiller at Four Roses, Brent Elliott. Brent, welcome back to our final round this morning, this evening, this afternoon, whenever it is you all are listening to the Bourbon Life Podcast.
Thanks, Matt.
My pleasure.
You had to get that one in there, didn't you, Matt? Yeah, I appreciate you doing that. Whatever time of day it is, you're listening. We appreciate everybody tuning in. So this round, we got something else special poured up. Brent, would you like to tell everybody what we're going to be drinking on this round? Yeah,
this will be interesting because, as you know, I didn't have this exact batch that you guys are going to be tasting from, but it is the same recipe. It's the OBSQ, so we're back to some high rye. So again, B, that indicates that it's the high rye mash bill. And the Q, that's a very interesting yeast strain. That's the one that creates the floral notes. It's always different, especially once you start getting up into the higher ages with these private selections. It runs the gamut from straight floral to candied to sometimes just fruit. So it's always interesting to see these OBSQs. The one I have here, it is 62.7% ABV.
Ooh. Wow.
And it's got some age on it. It's 10 years, 10 months old. So I don't know what the stats are on yours.
Yeah, this is a Liquor Barn pick, and thank you, Liquor Barn, for being one of our sponsors. I do buy bottles from Liquor Barn all the time, and this just happens to be one that I bought actually some time ago. This was 9 years, 7 months old. This one is 55.9, so 111.8 proof. So we're a little bit lower than yours, and we were talking about that off camera, but I wanted to ask you that once we came back on, in terms of your barrel proof, what your entry proof is. We talked about the single story rick houses that you're using there. But can you talk about what you're going into the barrel entry proof? Yeah.
Across the board, we go in at 120.
Okay. All right. So all these that we're drinking tonight, they're barrel strength, they're single barrel strengths. They've all dropped. So they've all lost proof. So they've lost alcohol as they're aging in the barrels.
Mm-hmm. And you'll see even in our warehouses that are very consistent in temperature, And there's still a variation of 7 to 8 degrees, in the middle of summer from the bottom to the top, which doesn't really make much of a difference if you're talking about a 5, 6, 7-year-old bourbon. But you start getting out 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years, like some of these are, you start to see that different environment will start to affect the proof, and in many cases, the overall profile of those bourbons. So it's very consistent, but you take a little difference and you're talking about a product like bourbon that we're talking years and years and years. Those small differences will start to compound and you'll start to notice it. And that's why you see, especially like our lower tiers, they tend to lose proof. The higher tiers will actually gain proof.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Matt, so what are you picking up on this one on the nose?
And Brent, do you notice that different warehouses tend to lend to different characteristics coming out of barrels or in the aging process?
Honestly, I'm not ever really been that conscious of warehouse location, tried to correlate any of the quality notes or tasting notes with warehouse location. But I know a lot of people out there that collect the private barrels, they whether the patterns are true or not, they find patterns. And I get that question a lot. And honestly, what's weird is I'll be out talking to someone. They'll be like, "Hey, have you tried that new, RS run of OBSQ?" And I feel kind of bad because they look to me and I should know what they're talking about. Like, "Oh yeah, RS." The fact is, when I'm looking at these batches and getting familiar with them, I never even look at the warehouse. I'm looking. If they said to me the 013 J02 run, that's the batch ID that I look at and be like, "Oh yeah, some grapefruit on that one," or how about the spice on that? But because some of these warehouses actually do achieve that degree of popularity, inevitably, I learn about those.
Yeah.
Because people ask me. And finally, I better go see what this whole RS run is all about. I'm hearing a lot about it. Oh, it's that batch. Okay, now I know what they're talking about. Now I can hold a conversation, speak the same language. It's again back to that communication thing.
Yeah, but it's funny because there's it's like a cult following. You get specific warehouses and people just go nuts over stuff. But I think there's truth to it. Even though you've got the same style warehouse, I think there's truth to these microclimates. Even from warehouse to warehouse, you're going to have a difference. And like you said, even from the lower tier to the upper tier, you're going to have some variation. And over time, even the slightest degree of variation, magnified over 10 years. Can create some significant differences, right? So
there are a lot of those little variables everywhere that keep it all interesting.
Right.
We've got a lot of expensive equipment and a lot of knowledge and tests for all this, but that only takes us so far. There's always that respect that you have to have for Mother Nature and all of those variables that she throws at us. And again, it keeps it interesting.
Definitely. Real quick, one other question I wanted to ask was, I was thinking about this because, some of the things I read to talk about fermentation process. Okay, so if you have a longer fermentation process, it can create more of the different congeners and things that you want that may have a lighter, fruitier, or if you run your distillation longer, you can also create a lighter distillate. Do you all use, even though you're using different yeast strains, do you use the same type of fermentation process, length, and distillation for each batch, or do you actually vary it based on those different strains, the mash bills?
No, we treat them all exactly the same.
Okay. All right.
And we see some differences in fermentation profile, particularly at the beginning, some take off a little bit faster, some not as fast, but typically all of them at 48 hours, they've reached that 90-degree temperature set point, and they all typically are worked off or complete, by 80 to 90 hours. So they don't behave remarkably different, and we don't treat them differently in any way.
All right. Well, that's good to know. Kind of interesting to me, just because thinking in terms of, you hear that longer distillations or longer fermentations can, play roles, but obviously this is your mash bill talking. It's not necessarily the variations in that fermentation. So very cool. So Matt, let's jump back to the whiskey. We kind of digressed there for a few moments, but that was a fun little trip to take. But let's go back. Let's talk about the nose on this. And what do you get?
I get a lot of the yeast strain and not as much of the rye on this one. I think the floral notes do come across. I pick up orange blossom, a little bit of orchid, kind of spring flowers on it. But then to me, it's got some fruits coming across. You get like nectarine, peaches, kind of like those bright like orchard fruits that way. But just really nice, really like playful, bright nose to it. It's really, really, it's different than the first two that we had, and I think I really like it for that.
And I think this may be the youngest of the, because the second one was 11, Matt. What was the one you had?
10-6.
Okay, yeah. So this is technically the youngest one of the bunch, not by much, but still younger. But yeah, your notes on that matter, just of course right on. That floral, the light floral comes through, those light fruits that you talked about as well. That orange blossom, man, the orange, that sweet orange comes through on the nose. A little bit of spice, but not as, like you said, as prevalent as the other ones, Matt. But yeah, just a very, very inviting. It makes you want to drink it. There's no question about that. It's like, I want to go ahead and take a drink. So Brent, anything else to add on that note? Of course, you're drinking something different.
I'm drinking something different.
Yeah, right.
Definitely some similarities. I'm kind of surprised I'm getting as much floral character out of this because it is that much older. But definitely the flavors on this, it's a higher proof. It's almost hard to sort through because it's so robust, so much going on in that nose. I think a little water might sort of break everything up and make it a little easier to sort through. But I'm definitely getting those floral notes, maybe some honeysuckle, some orange zest or lemon zest. I'm getting a hint of citrus, and then some hints of fruit, but a lot of that oak. And the interesting thing about this is the oak to me on this one is almost like walking into a warehouse. Like it's weird there, there's so many different ways we experience oak and communicate it. But to me, this is like warehouse oak.
All right, Brent. So you guys have a couple of big things that are going to be going on there to the distillery, some things changing. And I know you guys wanted to talk about that. We're excited to be able to share that with our listeners. But if you would, you'd like to tell everybody what the big news is?
Yeah, I have a few items here. As I mentioned, this is our 135th anniversary. So like always, we will be releasing a limited edition in the fall. It will be the 135th.
Yay.
But this is a perfect intro to what I'm going to show you next. We've tasted the different recipes. I'm sure, a lot of people have that opportunity, but to have that opportunity, you have to sort of be in the community. You have to get real lucky and you have to be diligent to find your different recipes. Yep. So we recognize that. And we're always talking about the recipes and want to be able to share that with people. So we're going to release later this summer what we're calling the Taste of 10. It's a tasting kit. So this has all 10 recipes, and all these actual samples are pulled from batches and barrels that are used in the private barrel program. So I'd have to cross-reference with some of my Excel sheets. Maybe one of these that we taste tonight is actually similar liquid or from the same batch as some of these. But we just thought that it would be great to be able to share that with consumers, to be able to have someone be able to not have to chase down all 10 recipes and take 2 years in doing it. They could just pick up the Taste of 10 and be able to taste side by side each of the recipes. And
that's great.
Yeah, I'm super excited about this. They're all bottled at 104 proof. Okay. And that's basically for parity. So you're looking at everything at the same proof, and they're all from the private barrel program. The ages vary a little bit, but they're relatively similar. 9 to 8.5 to like almost 10 years of age. Again, I have to look at my Excel sheets, but these were all selected. Really, just good representative, just the same way private barrel batches are selected. Very good representative samples of their particular recipes. So that will be out in basically our focus markets. This summer will be in Kentucky. First, we'll release them in the visitor center here in Lawrenceburg, and then we'll also release them in Georgia, California, and Illinois. I think I mentioned 30,000 kits total.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
So hopefully that's enough to go around. Hopefully everybody that wants one can get one.
Yeah, everybody's going to be standing outside the new visitor center there. There'll be 300 people lined up out there or more.
And I love this. Like, 104, that's the same proof as the
small batch
select. It's just, I think that's a great proof to, you don't have to chill filter it. It's going to be stable. And I think at 104, all the flavors are really, I don't, kind of like I was saying with that high proof bourbon. I like high proof bourbons. I know some people are just crazy about the high proof bourbons. But sometimes to me, it's at the high proof. It's sometimes hard to wade through and sort through some of those more subtle flavors when you're up at 120, 130 proof. I think 104 is a great proof to really showcase the differences in flavors between each of these different recipes.
Yeah, very nice. Because I know Matt likes to chase different. I'm sorry, guys. My computer screens just went blank for a second there. Kind of freaked me out. So I know Matt likes to chase some of these recipes down. You got a favorite though, right, Matt? Which one's your favorite?
I'm a big BK guy.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I couldn't remember. I knew you had a favorite. So there you go, Matt. Maybe I'll buy you one of this. You can just have all 10 at the same time.
What a dream.
Yeah. Nice guy. So Brent, you also have some other news as well that you wanted to share. So yeah, go ahead and tell our listeners what's going on.
We're doing a total brand refresh this year.
Okay.
By that, I mean, we're updating the look of all of our bottles, our website, and really, I think it was 2008 was the last time that we redid all of our labels. And we felt it was time to modernize, bring them all into a more cohesive look. And I actually have samples here that I can share. I don't know how well show up, but this is actually, I think this is already showing up on the market. This is going to be staggered because we don't bottle every product every day. So as we bottle the Four Roses bourbon and then small batch, single barrel, and select, those will slowly trickle out into the market. So that's the new look for the Four Roses bourbon.
Okay.
You probably really can't see this, but these eventually will all transition to a cap with a nice embossed Four Roses.
The roses,
in the wood top.
Nice. Yeah,
so that's the Four Roses bourbon. This is small batch.
Okay.
This maybe my personal favorite. I really like the looks of
nice
single barrel.
Yeah, that's really nice.
So that it's not a departure. It still has the same character, and it still conveys the same sense of Four Roses as a brand, but it's just modernized. It's just a new fresher look than that we had previously. And then this one is the small batch select.
Okay. Yeah. Very nice. I like that. I tell you, man, you guys came out, what was it, 2019 that you came out with the small batch select?
Yeah.
What was that? Man, that was just, I mean, spot on.
Yeah.
And that was like the first new product you guys had put out in quite some time. But man, you guys hit a home run. That's a blend of 6. Is that right? 6
That's right. Yeah.
Recipes. Man, I was thrilled to get that. I actually got a bottle signed by Al. And I've yet to crack. I will probably never crack that. That's one bottle I'll probably never crack open.
Yeah, I tell people just drink it. That's what it's there for. But yeah, hold on to that one. Just go buy a non-signed bottle.
Yeah, exactly right.
One. Yeah, keep that one.
And that's a good thing because you can find those. But that's what I love about it is the fact that is a bourbon that select is just great, and I suggest that to a lot of people.
Yeah, that is one I recommend probably as much, if not more, than any other bourbon. If someone looking for something different, uniquely Kentucky with a ton of flavor that's not going to break the bank,
that they can find pretty easily. I mean, that's another kicker right there. And because it's out there and it's just a great bourbon. So yeah, I suggest that to a lot of people, Brent. So thank you all. That was awesome. Yeah. I mean, that was when you guys came out with that, I was like, this is great. I mean, a home run, no question about it. But speaking of home runs, Matt, let's jump back over to this whiskey. What do you think in terms of the palate and finish? You like that segue?
Yeah,
I'm back on my Segway riding around.
Yeah, that's good.
What do you think?
I love it. It's got the palate for me starts out. It's not as spicy as we've had even again for this higher rye recipe. I don't get as much of those bright and spicy peppercorns and cinnamons right up front. I get a little bit more of the floral side. I get some, like clover and honey, kind of springtime aromas in the air. And then it lends itself to a baked apple or a baked apple pie, kind of like crisp green apple, cinnamon, kind of those baking spices, almost like a little butteriness from pie crust or dough on it. And then I think the rye spice really comes through on the finish. Some of those peppercorns come in, and then we get a little bit more of that high rye, that B recipe, kind of closing things out. But just another really, really great representation of the brand and a beautiful recipe.
Yeah, Brad picked a winner for sure for Liquor Barn with this one, man. This is a great one. And I can't add much. Obviously, I can't add anything more than what Matt said there. So, Brent, what about yours? How's yours coming through?
Mine is no surprise on the palate. It actually is a little softer on the palate than I suspected from the robust nose, with the extra proof in that one. But it's still robust. Like it hits my palate, and I'm getting rye. I'm getting a lot of the oak, and then just sort of a nice counterbalance, a nice undercurrent of some of those floral. They're coming across more fruity on the palate, and that happens a lot for me. Like it translates from floral on the nose to
fruity,
more of a fruit flavor on the palate. Probably because I don't know what flowers taste like, so it makes sense. But it's interesting how it translates. It's like it kind of tastes like it smells, but it's fruit. So it's just a subtle sweetness that kind of counterbalances that super robust rye and oak tone that I'm getting there. So this one's just bright and it's in your face. It's robust.
And yours is what was yours was 120 something? Was that?
It is 62.7. So was that 105.4? Or no, 125.4.
Yeah, 125.4. Yeah, so you're up there. Very nice, man. So it sounds, but easily drinkable too. Even with that
finish,
sounds like
just
right?
hangs on like, and cinnamon. That again,
cinnamon.
Mine's
Matt, I don't know. Did you get that? You were talking about the spices.
Yeah.
But again, I get that spit like the first one. That cinnamon just lingers and lingers and lingers. But it's just so nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Coming back.
Yeah,
it definitely does. Well, Brent, we're actually close to the end of round 3. It's just kind of crazy how fast this show has gone by. But before we wrap it up, I wanted to ask you, what has been the best part of this journey for you? If there's anything that you can point to that you can say, this has been probably the funnest part of my journey so far.
It's probably been sharing the experience with people I work with, other people in the industry, because as I touched on, it's been amazing just to look back and see how far the industry's come, the company's come, and just how much we've all grown and changed. And I guess there's a real sense of pride and camaraderie, again, internally and in the whole industry. And I feel like we share that with the consumers too. It's sort of a journey for them also. So that's probably like when I just sit back and think about, my level of satisfaction, what I really enjoy about this job. That's definitely up there. Like, especially in that context of, what about this journey? And that's really something that stands out.
Very, very cool. I really like that. You can tell you're passionate about what you do, and that's a great thing to see, because it translates to the products and to the brand itself. And as consumers, because Matt and I, we're consumers, obviously, and we respect that, and we can obviously see that as well. So that was a great answer. What does the future look like for you and for Four Roses?
Very bright.
Nice.
The one thing that's constant is change. So just keeping an open mind and trying to keep providing the best spirits we can for our growing base of consumers. So trying to keep it consistent and keep it excellent.
And where can our listeners find information about the brand and your products?
We have a great website, which will also be refreshed. I think I mentioned that briefly. But that will also be refreshed with the total brand refresh this summer. It's fourrosesbourbon.com. You can learn the history, the recipe, the 4-letter code. And I kind of gave you the Cliff's Notes version of that. But you have all that information on the website, how we use all those different recipes in our different products to create variety. All that's explained on the website, and information about tours at both facilities. All that's there. So it's a very good website. So I invite everyone to come visit there. And then while you're on the website, go ahead and book a tour and come see us in person.
Yeah, definitely. That's great. And hey, if you can get in the Mellow Moments Club,
yes,
give that a shot too. Matt and I are proud members.
Absolutely.
Fortunately, yeah, we're thrilled to be a part of that. So, all right, well, that's great. Well, I tell you what, Brent, before we wrap it up tonight, any final thoughts that you'd like to add before we close it out?
No, I'd just like to thank you both for having me on. This has been a lot of fun. So, thank you.
Well, great. Well, thank you for coming back on, Matt. Anything you'd like to add before we wrap it up?
Hey, Brent, thanks again for taking the time to sit down with us and cluing us in on what's been going on with you all since we last had you on back in 2021. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask have you all started working on the limited edition small batch for this year?
Yes.
All right. Can you give us just like a quick little just a quick little something to look forward to with it?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, this is going to be the least satisfying thing you've ever heard. It's going to be a combination of a few of our 10 different recipes, bottled at barrel strength, non-chill filtered. And it's going to be different from last year's.
Okay, good.
I'm sorry.
I know.
No, that's all right. That's a bottle I will hunt anywhere I can. That's one bottle every year I have to track down is your limited edition. So it's always a ringer, always a winner. So I always track it down. Brent, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
You're very welcome.
Great to have you. Great to have you back on the show. We appreciate you walking us through these different single barrels and the recipes, talking about yourself and the history of the brand, but also more importantly, the future and the things that are going on with you guys. Really excited about that and look forward to seeing how things continue to grow for what you guys are doing. Obviously, they're in great hands out there, doing a great job and putting out some just absolutely incredible products. So we're thrilled to be fans and also consumers of what you guys have and enjoy it on a regular basis. So thanks again for being with us tonight. We really appreciate that. And thank you guys. Like Matt says, whatever time of day it is you're listening to us, morning, noon, or night. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for listening. We appreciate your support. We appreciate all of our sponsors. We appreciate everything they do for us. We appreciate you, our listeners, as well. If you have any questions about the show or anything you've heard on the show, please feel free to email us. You can do that at thebourbonlife@gmail.com. You can also find us on Instagram and Facebook. We have a private Facebook group as well called the Bourbon Lifers. We'd love to have you join us there. We have some great conversations and a lot of fun in that group. So check that out if you would. And if you feel so inclined, please leave us a review on your favorite podcasting platform. With that said, I'm going to wrap it up, send us home with our tagline, which is, may your glasses always be full, and may you keep on living the bourbon life.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Bourbon Life Podcast. Our mission at the Bourbon Life is simple, to share our passion for all things bourbon with you every week. And we'd really love to hear your thoughts on how we're doing. You can find us on Instagram and Facebook at The Bourbon Life. You can also contact us by email at thebourbonlife@gmail.com. And you can always find us on your favorite podcast platform. If you have a moment, we'd love it if you would rate us and give us a review. So until next week, we hope your glass is always full and that you keep on living the bourbon life.